Section 2 then starts to look at what we mean by a business. Now, you'd have seen in Section 1 there that we actually thought about this very briefly already, where we use the term business to really think about an organization that seeks to make a profit. So if you think about the organizations around you, perhaps where you work is a profit-making organization. You go to Sainsbury's or Waitrose, they're seeking to make a profit. So you should be fairly familiar with this idea, and in fact you probably already use this term business without really thinking exactly what you mean by that. Now, it's important that we understand or recognize that there are going to be lots and lots of organizations that are not seeking to make a profit. We're going to focus mainly on businesses, therefore the profit orientated organizations, but we still need to maintain that level of knowledge of non-profit. So we've got a definition here of a business. It's an organization, however small, that's orientated towards making a profit for its owners. So that's really the key. And as it states here, although we use this term businesses, it's a pretty loose term really. You can have a wide range of organizations that would all fall under this business umbrella. So underneath here we've got a breakdown of that. So for example, there'll be a variety of legal structures. So for example, a company would be included as a business. Something that's owned by its shareholders, a sole tradership as well. So even though there's only one individual, the likelihood is that they're still going to be a profit-seeking or profit-orientated organization. Likewise, a partnership, so two or more people that seek to make a profit. We've got a bit of information here about not-for-profit, so frequently structured and run on the lines of a business. So if you went to look at a major charity, they're often very similar structure-wise, but obviously they have that very different end target. Now we use what we'd call the 3 E's to try and see how well a not-for-profit is doing, trying to measure their performance. At the same time, the not-for-profit themselves would be focusing on these 3 E's, on economy, on efficiency, and on effectiveness, in order to make sure that the limited resources that they have are being used in the best possible way. Now, just to point out that at the bottom there, that you can't always think about what an organization does in order to decide whether it's profit orientated or not. For example, you might think of schools as a not-profit or not-for-profit organization, but obviously with a private school it may very well be profit orientated. Over the page there, then we'll start thinking about stakeholders. So we're gonna choose these this idea of a business. We're going to think about stakeholders within the business. Now, you've most likely heard this term stakeholder before, but what we really mean by a stakeholder is anyone who has a stake in the organization. Now, if you were to think about that in a bit more detail, you could really consider anyone who is going to be influenced by our business, or you could think about anyone who could influence our business. And when we look at the list of stakeholders underneath, we're going to see that they're going to fall into one of those 2 categories. Now, the importance of considering stakeholders is really to think about the fact that you're going to have to consider, or a business is going to have to consider its stakeholders when it's making any sort of decision. So it's really important that we consider the impact on our stakeholders when we're making any decisions. So underneath we've got a table here. We've first of all split our stakeholders into primary and secondary. So primary are going to be our shareholders, so the owners of the business, and then we've got a few secondary underneath here, so managers, customers, and so on. We've also thought about what's actually at stake, so we've called them stakeholders, but what is their stake in the business? And then we've also got a column there to think about, well, what actually are they going to want back? Why have they got a stake in the business? What is the result that they're looking for? So what I want you to do is have a look down that list. Just pause the recording for a second and have a go at thinking about, well, what do we think is going to go into this 3rd column then? So just have a think about filling in what we think each of these stakeholders will expect of the business. So just pause it there, have a go at that, and then press play again, and we'll go through Okay, so hopefully you've come up with a few ideas there. Don't worry too much if you haven't got any. We're gonna pop a few on there now, and also don't forget all of the solutions to the interactive quizzes or the interactive questions are at the back of your notes just after the last chapter. So let's have a think about shareholders. So shareholders, obviously the owners of the business, and they've obviously put some money into the business. They've invested money in return for a share of the business itself. Now, what's the main thing they're going to want? They're going to want some sort of return. And obviously, an investor or a shareholder is going to see return in one of two ways. They're going to see return either in the form of a dividend, so a share of the profits each period, or they're going to see an increase in their share price. So if I bought a share at the beginning of the year for $1 per share, and at the end of the year my shares are now worth $1.50 per share, I may or may not have received a dividend, but I've seen an increase in my share price, so my capital value has increased. So obviously all of our decisions are going to have to consider that. At the same time then, whilst trying to give my shareholders the maximum return possible, I'm also considering then my employees, for example. My employees are going to have their livelihoods on the line, so they rely on the business to pay a salary, to give them a continued employment. So I have to balance that out. For example, I could pay out lots and lots and lots of profits to my shareholders if I cut everybody else's salary. Now, I'm going to have to consider the impact on both of those stakeholders and, weigh up, what it's going to have overall. Now, you'd need to be very careful as a business in cutting salaries because, people who are paid less than they feel that they should be are obviously going to be pretty demotivated. And if they're worse at their job, that's most likely going to lead to poor profits overall, so less money to give to shareholders. So, we really need to be sensible with with what we're doing, and the whole idea of a stakeholder analysis, this idea of picking apart stakeholders and considering how we should treat them or what impact our actions are going to have. This is really vital. So we kind of said there that our employees are going to be considering their salaries, so their own return, their own remuneration. I guess they're also going to be thinking about career progression. So I'm going to have to make sure that at some point down the line there's a space for people to move up, and I'm sure you guys are the same. You're thinking about where you're going to go next in the organization. We'd also need to consider our customers, so thinking about giving our customers good value, so that's going to be really important to them. Making sure that we can carry on supplying, so reliability of supply is going to be a good one. Customers really don't want to buy from a company or a business one moment and then them be gone the next. Suppliers and other business partners, so thinking about who we buy our, for example, raw materials from, well, they might be considering prompt payment as something that they expect. So again, I'm going to have to consider how much money I give to my employees when I'm thinking about how quickly I'm going to be able to pay my suppliers. Obviously lenders, and lenders are really going to be interested in two things. So if I borrow money from the bank, for example, they're going to want me to be able to pay the interest they're charging, and they're going to want me to be able to repay the loan at the end of the term. So they're going to be interested in those two things. That's what they've got at stake, and that's what they expect in return. Now, the government's going to be a stakeholder for all businesses, but the level at which they impact you is going to depend on the type of business that you have. Despite that, we could still consider, they're going to expect you to treat your employees fairly, for example. So we're going to have to consider that. And they're going to consider, or they're going to expect some sort of tax revenue. So we're going to have to think about that too. Again, similar to the government, the impact that the local community has on you will really depend on the type of business you have or you are. But again, they might consider, if you've got some sort of manufacturing process, they might just expect you to have reasonable business practices. So not making lots of noise late at night, not polluting the air too much, not dumping your rubbish in the local area, that kind of thing. And we'll see increasingly businesses trying to trying to be responsible in the way in which they behave in the local environment. And in fact, when we move on to section 3.1, we'll be able to see a bit more about corporate responsibility. Finally, then you've got the natural environment. So you're really thinking about environmental practices here. So maintaining good environmental practices will be key. Okay, so that's a look at our stakeholders, or the types of stakeholders that a business may have. Over the page, we'll just finish off section 3 there by looking at sustainability and corporate responsibility. Now, what we mean really by sustainability is the fact that businesses really have to consider how it's using its resources, or how, as it says here, how it's chosen strategy. So whether we decide to launch a new product, whether we decide to open a new store, whether we decide to relocate, how is that going to have an impact on my resources, both in terms of tangible resources, so raw materials, for example, and my intangibles. So think about that human resource aspect. And you'll see an increasing importance of this idea of sustainability, of corporate responsibility in modern business, and it's something that's become very high on the agenda of several businesses, or almost all businesses, as they try to meet the needs of its stakeholders. So we've just got a few definitions here. Firstly, sustainability. So by sustainability, we mean the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising future generation their ability to meet their own needs. By business sustainability, then, we're thinking about how that works for a business. So how can a business operate in a sustainable way, how it should interact with individuals and governments in doing so. And then finally, we've got corporate responsibility, so the actions, activities, obligations of businesses in achieving this sustainability. So in achieving, this definition we've seen at the start there. That's the end of this recording then. So if you pick up the next one, and we'll move on to section 4, which is looking a bit more at business objectives.